Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. The city of Ashai by the Shadow stood where the river Ash met the blackened sea, a place where the sun rose dim and the air smelled faintly of brimstone. No birds sang there, and even the waves seemed to move more slowly, as though the water itself feared the shore. Lanterns burned day and night, their light swallowed by the mists that coiled between the streets. In that strange city lived a girl called Melanie, though few ever spoke her name. She was a servant in the House of Dust, one of 1,000 slaves who swept the ash from the steps and poured water for those who whispered of demons and shadows. Her masters wore long robes of smoky silk and spoke in tongues older than men, but Melanie understood none of it. Her world was one of silence, of orders obeyed and pain endured. She did not remember her mother or father, only the cries of children taken from their beds and the clang of iron doors. Yet from her earliest years, she had known something stirred within her. When she was afraid, the air around her would grow warm. When she wept, the lanterns would flare brighter. Once, when another servant struck her, the woman's hand blistered as though from fire, though no flame had touched her. The overseers beat her for that, but in her heart, Melanie felt no guilt, only a strange, fierce joy. Every night she dreamt of flames, not the dull orange fire of torches, but crimson and gold and white, dancing like living things. Sometimes faces moved within them, faces that spoke without sound, their lips forming words she did not yet understand. And always she awoke with a name on her lips. R'hllor. No one in the House of Dust spoke that name. When she whispered it, the other servants crossed themselves and looked away. Hush, they said. The Red God is forbidden here. His fire burns too brightly for Ashai. But Melanie could not hush. The name filled her like breath. One evening, as she poured water for her masters, she caught the eye of a traveler, an old man cloaked in gray silk, his skin pale as milk. He watched her too long, and when the others turned away, he pressed something into her palm, a shard of black glass, sharp and cold. Hold it to the flame, he murmured. When the light breaks, you will see. That night, when all was silent, Melanie crept into the storeroom and lit a single candle. She held the dragon glass to the flame. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the candle flickered, and the light bent, splitting into red and gold and white, just as in her dreams. A voice came from nowhere and everywhere. You are not meant to serve in darkness. Melanie dropped the shard, but it did not fall. It hovered before her eyes, glowing faintly from within. She saw shapes forming in the reflection, soldiers in black armor, a great wall of ice, a sword burning like the sun. She saw herself standing before that fire, robed in red, her eyes alight with power. Then the vision shattered. The shard fell to the floor and cracked in two. The candle went out, and she was left trembling in the dark. In the morning, the overseers found her kneeling by the ashes, her hands blistered but her eyes burning bright. They struck her, demanding to know what she had done. She said nothing, but when they raised their whips again, the air grew hot, so hot that the iron buckles on their belts began to smoke. Witch, they cried. Shadow spawn. They dragged her through the streets to the Temple of the Black Stone, where the priests of the shadow waited. These were men with eyes black as coal, whose blood had been mixed with the dust of demons. They studied her in silence, their fingers tracing strange sigils in the air. "Born of fire," one whispered. But whose fire? That night they locked her in a cell beneath the temple, with only a single torch for company. Melanie sat against the cold wall, her skin slick with fear. Yet in the flicker of the torch, she saw something move, a flicker of warmth that was not merely light, and she knew she was not alone. A woman's voice whispered softly in her ear, like the crackling of a hearth. "Do not be afraid, child of flame. Your suffering is the forge. In fire, you shall be remade." Melanie lifted her eyes toward the torch. For an instant, the fire swelled, forming the shape of a woman's face. A face terrible and beautiful all at once, eyes like coals, lips like molten gold. "Who are you?" Melanie asked, though her voice was barely a breath. "You know my name." And Melanie did. She spoke it, trembling. "R'hllor." The fire flared bright enough to blind her, and in that moment she felt her chains melt away. Not the iron ones, but the chains within her heart. She no longer felt small or powerless. The fire was inside her now, singing in her blood. When the priests came for her at dawn, they found the torch burned to white ash, and the girl gone. Only the mark of a red flame remained upon the stone. Far above, in the waking city, smoke curled from 1,000 chimneys, as though Asshai itself had begun to breathe again. And somewhere in the streets, a girl walked barefoot through the mist, clutching half a shard of dragon glass to her breast, her eyes reflecting the dawn's faint light. The girl named Melanie was gone, but her story, the story of Melisandre before the Red God, had just begun. Melanie fled through the dark streets of Asshai, the mists clinging to her like living things. Every alley looked the same. Every wall whispered secrets she could not bear to hear. Behind her, bells began to toll. The temple had discovered her absence. Soon the Shadowbinders would hunt her, their eyes black with sorcery, their hounds half beast and half smoke. But she did not stop. The fire within her burned too fiercely for fear to root. Barefoot and breathless, she ran until the city's lamps thinned and the air grew colder. Before her loomed the edge of Asshai, where the black stones of the walls met the emptiness of the shadowlands. Few dared to cross that boundary, for the land beyond was cursed. Even the bravest said the darkness there could drink a man's soul. Melanie paused at the threshold, her heart pounding. The shard of dragon glass in her hand pulsed faintly, as if alive. She held it up, and the faintest glimmer of red flared within. "Guide me," she whispered. The light trembled, pointing eastward, toward the hills of ash that swallowed the moonlight. So she went. Days passed. How many? She could not tell. There was no sun in that land, only a dull twilight that never changed. She found no food save for bitter roots, no water save for the dew that gathered on black stones at dawn. Yet the fire inside her sustained her. Her hunger dulled. Her thirst faded. At night, she dreamed of flames that spoke in tongues she was beginning to understand. One evening, as she climbed a ridge of broken rock, she saw a faint light flickering in the distance. For a moment, she thought it another dream, but it moved like fire, bright and real. With trembling hope, she followed it. It led her to a camp, though camp was too kind a word. A ring of scorched stone surrounded a small fire, beside which a man knelt, cloaked in red and gold. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but his hands, when he lifted them, were scarred by many burns. He did not startle when she approached. "I wondered when you would come," he said in the common tongue, his voice calm as still water. "The fire told me of you." Melanie stopped short. "You know me?" "I know what you are becoming," said the man. "I am Benero, servant of the Lord of Light. I came to this cursed place seeking one who would rise after me." The fire said her name was Melanie. She stared. "Roller spoke to me, in the dark, in the temple." Benero smiled faintly. "He speaks to those who will listen. You have heard him, child of flame. But hearing is not yet knowing. You must learn." He beckoned her closer to the fire, and she obeyed. The warmth wrapped around her like an embrace. For many days, Benero taught her. He showed her how to gaze into the flames and see visions, how to tell which were truth and which were deceit. He taught her the words of the Ashai priests and how to call upon light to drive away shadow. Yet the lessons were hard. When she failed, the fire punished her with heat that seared her flesh, but never scarred. "The Lord tests you," Benero said when she wept. "To serve him, you must be reborn through pain." One night, after long hours of study, Benero bade her look into the flames once more. "Tell me what you see." Melanie leaned close. The fire wavered and shifted. At first, she saw nothing but smoke. Then shapes began to form. A great city burning, men and women screaming, and above them, a shadow with wings, blotting out the sun. "What is it?" she whispered. "The truth," Benero said. "Fire and blood, always fire and blood. The world will burn, child, and only those who serve the light will endure." "But how can light survive such darkness?" He regarded her, eyes gleaming through the flames. "By sacrifice. The Lord's gift is life eternal, but his price is always life given. One must feed the fire." That night, she could not sleep. She stared at the dying embers and thought of the slaves she had known, their faces gray, their eyes hollow. She thought of the pain she had endured, of the voice that had saved her. Was this what the Red God demanded? That she become a bringer of death for the sake of life? Before dawn, she left the camp to gather water from a narrow stream. When she returned, she found Benero standing beside the fire, speaking to someone, but there was no one there. Only the flames, and within them, a shape like a woman's face, beautiful and cruel. Melanie froze, the same face she had seen in the temple's torch. Benero turned. "Come, child. The Lord has chosen you." The fire flared brighter, and the woman's voice filled the air. "The time comes. One must burn so the other may rise." Melanie's heart thundered. "What do you mean?" But the fire did not answer in words. It moved. The flames reached outward, curling like hands. Benero's expression did not change as they touched his robes, and then in an instant, he was burning. Melanie screamed and fell back, but Benero did not cry out. He stood within the fire, his arms raised. "I give myself," he shouted. "May the light endure." The fire consumed him swiftly. When it faded, only ash and a ring of glowing embers remained, and then the voice came again, soft inside her mind. "He was the old flame. You are the new. Rise, Melisandre." The name struck her like a bell. Melisandre. It was not hers, yet it felt true. The shard of dragonglass at her throat pulsed once, then crumbled to dust. She fell to her knees before the dying fire. "Why me?" she whispered. "I am nothing. You were nothing, but you have been tempered in shadow, and now you will shine." The wind rose, scattering the ashes. They swirled around her like snow. When the dawn came, a pale, sickly light that had no warmth, she rose to her feet. There was no fear left in her, no doubt, only purpose. She took the scarred cloak from Benero's remains and wrapped it about her shoulders. It smelled faintly of smoke and spice. In its folds, she found a small iron cup and a pouch of red powder. She did not know it then, but it was fire dust, the seed of the flames she would one day conjure. Melisandre, no longer Melanie, turned her gaze toward the west. Somewhere beyond the Black Hills lay the lands of men who did not yet know the Red God's name. She would bring them light. She would bring them truth. And if they would not listen, then she would bring them fire. The wind whispered through the ashes, and she walked into it, a lone figure cloaked in red, her eyes shining like embers beneath the endless shadow. The wind carried the taste of salt and soot as Melisandre made her way westward. Behind her, Ashai's black walls faded into mist, and before her stretched the long, treacherous road that wound toward the lands of men. Few dared leave Ashai, and fewer still returned. The shadowlands were a graveyard of old things, ruins of forgotten cities, bones of beasts too vast to name, rivers that ran thick with the dust of ages. For many days she walked alone. The sky never brightened, yet she began to feel time again, the slow rhythm of hunger, thirst, and sleep. Each night she built a small fire and stared into it, waiting for the voice that had guided her. Sometimes she heard it faintly, a whisper of warmth in the cold air. Other times there was only silence. But always the fire burned red. She crossed a valley filled with strange stones, smooth and glistening like obsidian. There she met a trader's caravan, bound for Yitai. The men who led it were wary of her red cloak, but their leader, a broad-shouldered man named Corin, allowed her to join them. "You'll not last another night alone," he said. "The things that move in these lands don't fear the dark. They are the dark." Melisandre said nothing, but as they camped that evening, she noticed Corin's men watching her with unease. When she knelt by the fire, the flames shifted, rising high as though greeting her. The men muttered prayers to their gods, making signs against evil. "You've the look of a shadowbinder," one said. "I am no servant of shadow," she answered. "I serve the Lord of Light." They stared, and she saw fear in their faces. That night, as the others slept, Melisandre awoke to whispers. Two men stood near her, their daggers drawn, arguing in hushed tones. "She's cursed," one hissed. "You saw her eyes." "She's a woman alone," the other muttered. "We could sell her in Carcosa." Melisandre did not move. She felt the fire in her veins stir, slow and patient, as if it too listened. When the men stepped closer, the campfire suddenly blazed, roaring to life. Sparks leapt like arrows, striking their clothes. One screamed, patting at the flames, but they clung to him, searing through leather and skin. The other fled into the dark, shouting for Corin. When the leader arrived, he found only ash. Melisandre sat before the fire, her face calm, her eyes reflecting its crimson light. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I gave them to the Lord," she said softly. "They sought to harm me. The fire judged them." Corin's face hardened. "Leave us at dawn. Your God brings nothing but death." At sunrise, she walked away without looking back. The fire did not judge him, yet. Beyond the valley, the land softened into pale hills. The air grew clearer, and for the first time since her flight from Ashai, she saw a true dawn. The sky was still dim and gray, but a band of gold shimmered at the edge of the world. She felt warmth on her face, and for a moment she wept. That night she built no fire. Instead, she climbed a rise and watched the stars. They seemed distant, cold, and uncaring. "Why have you chosen me?" she whispered. "There are others stronger, wiser, more worthy." The wind answered with a sigh. In it, she heard faint words, "Because you believe." The next morning, she reached the shores of the Jade Sea. ships anchored in the bay, their sails painted with dragons, cranes, and suns. She had heard of these places from slaves' tales. Et, land of emperors and gold. There, the priests of the gods wore silken robes and jeweled masks. They spoke of light and order, but their temples were built on bones. Melisandre found work at a harbor shrine where the priests paid her to clean the lamps and burn incense. They called her the Red Woman for the color of her cloak. Many came to the temple seeking fortune or prophecy, and some whispered that she could see beyond the veil. One night, a nobleman entered the shrine. His name was Moroccan, a counselor of Yeti's bright emperor. He carried himself with arrogance, but his eyes betrayed fear. "The gods are silent," he said. "Dreams of fire plague my sleep. I am told you can read the flames." Melisandre nodded and led him to the great brazier at the temple's heart. She poured the red powder she had taken from Bonero into the coals, and the fire flared to life, casting long shadows across the walls. "Look," she whispered. The nobleman peered into the flames and gasped. His own face stared back at him, wreathed in fire. Then the image changed, soldiers burning, a palace collapsing, a throne melting into molten gold. "What does it mean?" he cried. "The Lord of Light shows truth," Melisandre said. "Only through fire can lies be purged, repent, or burn." He fled, leaving her alone with the fire. But the next morning, word spread through the city. Moroccan had been found dead in his chamber, burned to ash, though no fire had touched the room. The temple priests whispered that she was cursed. They cast her out before sunset, fearing her power. Yet as she walked the streets, people turned to watch. Some crossed themselves, others knelt, murmuring prayers. Fear and faith were brothers, she had learned. They walked hand in hand. She wandered the coast for a year, teaching where she could, healing the sick with warmth from her hands, calling down fire upon those who threatened her. Tales spread of the Red Woman who could see through flame. Some said she had the blood of demons, others that she was the bride of the sun. But in her heart, Melisandre knew her path was not yet complete. One evening, as she meditated beside a dying fire, a vision came unbidden. She saw a man, tall, with a lion's mane of golden hair, standing on a battlefield of ice. His sword was broken, his eyes filled with despair. Behind him, a great shadow moved, vast as night itself. And beyond it, faint but unyielding, burned a single red star. She woke, trembling, the taste of ash on her lips. The fire before her had gone cold, but its shape remained, 5 points of red coal, like a star. It was then she knew her destiny lay not in Yeti, nor in Ashai, but far to the west, where men still feared the long winter. A whisper echoed in her mind. "Seek the cold. There the light will burn brightest." Melisandre rose, wrapped her cloak around her shoulders, and turned her gaze toward the setting sun. The road ahead would be long, filled with blood and shadows, but she no longer feared the dark, for within her burned a fire that would never die. Melisandre left the shores of Yeti aboard a narrow ship of black hull and crimson sails, bound for the west. The sea stretched endless and silent beneath a sky as pale as smoke. She stood at the prow through wind and storm, her red cloak snapping like flame, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The sailors whispered of her in fear, calling her Ash Witch when they thought she could not hear. Yet none dared meet her gaze. The captain, an old man with rings of bone in his beard, warned her, "The waters beyond Leng are cursed. Men vanish there. The sea itself swallows them whole." Melisandre smiled faintly. The sea swallows all men in time, but I am not meant for the deeps. The voyage was long and cruel. A sickness swept through the crew, striking them down one by one. Their skin turned gray, their lips black. The captain fell on the 12th day, gasping for air. The men begged her to heal him. She knelt beside him, placed her hand on his chest, and whispered to the fire within. The man's eyes flew open, but the light in them was not mortal. He gasped once, then fell still. When they buried him at sea, the waters hissed and steamed where his body sank. After that, the crew kept their distance. None would speak to her save one, a young sailor named Ricano, who had the courage of youth and the curiosity of a fool. "Are you truly a priestess?" he asked one night as the stars shimmered coldly above. "I am a servant," she said. "Of what god? The only one that burns?" He frowned. "There are many gods." "Then there are many lies," she replied. For a while he said nothing. Then softly, "Do you ever grow lonely, my lady?" She looked at him. His face was open and kind, untouched by the world's cruelty. "Fire does not know loneliness," she said. "It only knows hunger." When they reached the coast of Sothorios, storms drove them off course. The ship limped into a hidden bay ringed with jagged rocks. The crew went ashore to gather food, but Melisandre stayed behind, sensing unease in the air. That night, screams echoed from the jungle. None returned. By dawn, only Ricano lived. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. "They came from the trees," he whispered. "Things with teeth and no eyes." Melisandre touched his shoulder. "Rest, you will be safe." He slept, and she built a fire beside him. As the flames rose, she saw shapes within them, dark forms moving through the jungle, circling closer. She took the iron cup from her cloak, filled it with oil and blood from her palm, and whispered the words Benero had taught her. The fire answered. When the creatures came at dusk, the shore erupted in flame. The beasts shrieked, retreating into the trees. Ricano awoke to the sight of the burning forest, his mouth open in awe. "You saved us," he said. "No," she murmured, staring into the fire. "He saved us." They left the bay before sunrise, steering west once more, but Ricano grew fevered in the days that followed. The jungle had marked him. By the time they sighted the distant coast of Valyria, he could no longer stand. Melisandre held his hand as he shivered. "Will your God save me?" he asked weakly. She hesitated. "The Lord of Light saves the soul, not the flesh." "I don't understand." "You will." When his breath stilled, she closed his eyes and lifted his body to the flames. The sailors wept, but Melisandre only watched as the fire consumed him, her heart cold and steady. The smoke rose high, curling toward the west. She took it as a sign. At last, the ship reached the smoking ruins of Valyria. The sailors refused to land, fearing the curse that still lingered over the doom. But Melisandre insisted. "There are secrets buried in those fires," she said. "I must see them." She went ashore alone, her red cloak trailing through gray ash. The earth still smoked, and rivers of molten stone ran through the broken streets. Towers lay toppled like bones, and dragons' skulls blackened in the heat. Deep within the ruins, she found a chamber where molten rock flowed like blood. In its glow stood an altar of black stone. Carved upon it were words she could not read, but the air thrummed with power. She placed her hands upon the stone. Visions struck her like a storm. Kings crowned and cast down, dragons rising and falling, the world drowning in ice. And always, she saw one figure, a man with the face of a wolf and the heart of fire, standing before the cold and the dark. The flames whispered his name, but she could not yet hear it. When she awoke, the chamber had grown cold. The molten flow was gone, hardened to black glass. She felt weak, yet alive in a way she had never been before. The fire within her had deepened, sharpened. It spoke now not in riddles, but in command. "Go north," it said, "beyond the sea, beyond the mountains, beyond the wall." She left Valyria with her purpose renewed. The sailors refused to take her further, so she traveled through Essos by foot and by caravan, passing through lands where her name became a whisper. In Volantis, she found others who worshipped Aryler, and there, in the red temple that rose above the black walls, she met those who called her sister. But none burned as she did. The high priest welcomed her, his voice like thunder in the hall of flame. "You have seen the doom and lived. You have walked through fire and come forth whole. The Lord has chosen you, Melisandre of Asshai." She bowed her head. "Then I am his." From that night on, she served in the temple, learning the deep rites and the secret tongues. She healed the sick, saw through the fire, and foretold the coming of the great darkness. Some called her prophetess, others called her mad, but she cared little for names. One night, as she gazed into the great brazier, she saw again the wolf-faced man. The vision burned brighter now, showing him in a frozen land where shadows moved beneath the snow. Around him gathered men with eyes of ice, and over all loomed the same red star. Melisandre trembled. "When will it come?" she asked. The fire whispered, "Soon, and you will be there." She closed her eyes and bowed low before the flames. "Then I will serve. Until my last breath, I will serve." Outside, the bells of Volantis rang through the night, and the river reflected the color of blood. Within the temple, Melisandre's eyes glowed faintly in the firelight, eyes that saw not the world as it was, but as it would be. And beyond the sea, far to the west, the long winter waited. Years passed in Volantis, though to Melisandre, time became as shifting as the flames she served. The Red Temple stood vast and silent upon the hill above the old Rhoyne, its 1,000 fires burning day and night. She grew in power there. Her prayers could still a fever. Her visions guided merchants, kings, and cutthroats alike. Yet for all her growing renown, her heart remained restless. The other red priests spoke of salvation through flame, of cleansing the world of darkness, but their words rang hollow to her ears. They served the God of light as a doctrine, not as a truth. She had seen the light's face. She had heard his voice. Theirs was a temple of ritual. Hers was a temple of fire. One night, while she stood upon the balcony and watched the moon's red reflection in the river, a boy came running from the temple steps. He was young, a novice, breathless and pale. "Mistress Melisandre," he gasped, "a traveler seeks you. He claims the flames sent him." Melisandre turned. The boy's fear intrigued her. "Bring him." Moments later, a man was led into the torchlight. He was cloaked in coarse brown wool, his face half hidden, but she saw the weariness in his stance, the way his hand lingered near the knife at his belt. A sellsword, or something like it. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and cautious. "I've crossed half the world seeking one who dreams of fire," he said. "They told me her name was Melisandre." "You've found her," she replied. "Who sent you?" The man hesitated. "Dreams. A face of flame. A voice that told me to find the woman who walks with fire in her eyes." Melisandre's breath stilled. The Lord's hand was at work again. "And what did the voice say to you?" "That I would see the end of the world," he said quietly. and that you would show it to me." She studied him for a long moment. Beneath the grime of travel, he bore the look of Westeros, the pale skin, the gray eyes like sea fog. "What is your name?" "Marin Waters," he said. "Once a knight, no longer." "Then kneel, Marin of no name," she said, "and look into the fire." He obeyed, though uncertainty flickered in his gaze. She poured oil upon the brazier, and the flames leapt high, red and gold. Together they watched. At first there was only the crackle of burning wood, but then the fire shifted, revealing a vision so clear that even Marin gasped. He saw a great wall of ice stretching across the world, saw shadows moving upon it, and a single light burning far below, a light that would not die. "What is it?" he whispered. "The end," she said softly, "and the beginning." In the days that followed, Marin stayed within the temple, drawn to her fire as a moth to a candle. He spoke of his homeland, of lords and kings and a cold wind rising in the north. Melisandre listened, though she already knew the name of that land from her visions: Westeros, the place where her destiny lay. At times, she saw conflict in Marin's eyes, a spark of doubt that made him human. He had killed for coin, betrayed friends, lost his honor. But she saw in him what he could not see himself, a purpose waiting to be forged. "You will come with me," she told him one evening. "Across the sea." He frowned. "To what end?" "To serve the Lord of Light. There is a darkness rising in your homeland. I have seen it in the flames." "I'm no priest," he said bitterly. "I've no faith left." "Then I will give you faith," she said. "Through fire, all things are made pure." And so they left Volantis together under cover of night. The priests watched her go, but dared not stop her. Some whispered that she had turned her back on the temple. Others said the Lord himself had called her westward. They sailed first to Lys, where the sky was blue, and the air smelled of jasmine. Marin marveled at the beauty of it, but Melisandre's gaze turned always west. She spent her days on the deck, eyes fixed on the horizon, whispering to the flames in her small brazier. One night, as the ship drifted through calm waters, she spoke. "The fire shows me a throne made of swords," she murmured, "a kingdom torn in war, and beyond it, a darkness that hungers." Marin said nothing. "You were born in that land," she continued. "You will guide me to its heart." "Why me?" he asked. "Because you still doubt," she said, "and doubt is the doorway to truth." Storms followed them through the summer sea. Lightning split the sky, the mast cracked, waves as high as mountains crashed over the deck. Men prayed to gods both old and new, but Melisandre stood unmoving in the rain, her hands raised to the heavens. When lightning struck the ship's mast, the flames danced down its length and died at her feet, leaving her untouched. After that, the crew would not meet her eyes. When at last they reached the coast of Dorne, she felt the change in the air, the warmth of a sun she had not seen in years, the scent of salt and sand. But she did not smile. Her visions had shown her no comfort here, only the long road ahead. They traveled northward, through parched deserts and red mountains, through towns where men stared at her crimson robes and murmured of witchcraft. Marin kept his sword close, but no man dared touch her. In the Reach, they found a sept ablaze. The townsfolk cursed her as a heretic, saying she had brought the fire with her. But Melisandre only looked into the smoke and said, "The Lord of Light cleanses what must burn." That night, she stood beside the ruins of the sept and whispered to Marin, "Do you see now how false gods fall before the truth?" He turned away. "You speak of truth, but all I see is death." "Death is his servant," she said, "and his gift." As they journeyed on, winter winds began to follow them. Even in the south, the air felt colder, the nights longer. Melisandre felt it deep within her bones, the same cold she had seen in her visions. The great shadow was stirring. When they reached the harbor at White Harbor, she paused upon the dock and looked northward. "There," she whispered, pointing toward the unseen lands beyond. "There lies the heart of the storm." Marin shivered. "The north is no place for priests or prophets. It is a place for fire," she said, her voice soft and certain. "And fire must go where the night is strongest." The wind swept through her hair, carrying with it the faint scent of ash and snow. She closed her eyes and saw once more the image from her dreams, the wall of ice, the sword of flame, and a man standing alone against the dark. She did not yet know his name, but she knew he would need her. And when he called, she would be ready. Winter's scent rode the wind as Melisandre and Marin rode north through the wolflands of Westeros. The south's warm gardens and golden fields lay far behind. Here the trees grew ancient and gnarled, their trunks pale as bone and their branches heavy with frost. The road wound through forests where the snow never melted, and each night the sky burned cold and clear above them, the stars sharp as blades. They came first to Winterfell, the heart of the north. Its towers rose gray and solemn above the white plain, steam curling from its hot springs like breath from a sleeping beast. Marin stared at it with a strange expression. "I fought once for a lord of these lands," he said quietly. "They say the Starks never forget." "Then they are wise," Melisandre said. "The fire remembers all." The guards at the gate watched her warily. Few red priests had ever come this far north, and her crimson robes shone like blood against the snow. She asked no favor, only shelter for the night. The steward, an old man with a limp, granted her a place in the guest hall. At supper, she ate little, watching the northern men as they drank and laughed around the hearth. They were rough, yet there was strength in them, a stubborn endurance that felt older than the seven. When one of the younger men asked who she was, she answered, "A servant of the Lord of Light, come to seek the cold's end." Her words brought silence. Then a man at the table, a burly one with a wolf's pelt across his shoulders, spat into the fire. "We've no need for southern gods here. The old gods watch us well enough." Melisandre smiled faintly. "Then let them watch. When the long night comes, we shall see whose eyes still see." The next morning, she and Marin were sent on their way. Snow fell thick as feathers, the world around them turning white. The road north was little more than a frozen track, winding between hills of stone. One night, they found shelter in the ruins of an old watchtower. The fire crackled low, and Melisandre's face flickered in its light. Marin watched her silently for a long while before speaking. "When you look into the flames, what do you see?" "Truth," she said. "And what truth do they show you of me?" Melisandre studied him. "You will die with a sword in your hand, beneath a sky filled with fire, but your death will not be the end of you." He shuddered, though she spoke the words gently. "Is that a prophecy or a curse?" "All prophecies are both," she said. They traveled on. As they passed through the wild lands beyond Winterfell, they began to hear tales from the small folk, stories of pale riders seen at night, of men who vanished in the snow, leaving only blood behind. Marin scoffed, but Melisandre listened. When at last they reached the wall, the sight of it stilled them both. It loomed vast and terrible, a mountain of frozen blue stretching higher than any tower of man. The wind that swept down from it carried a chill that bit the skin like knives. "So this is the wall," Marin murmured. "I'd heard tales. None did it justice." Melisandre's eyes shone red in the fading light. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "The greatest fortress of the darkness ever built." At the gate, black-clad sentinels challenged them. They were the Night's Watch, keepers of the wall, sworn to guard the realms of men. Their commander, a grizzled man named Mormont, granted them entry with suspicion. "We've no need of priests here," he growled. Melisandre bowed her head. "All men need fire, even those who live in ice." She was given a small cell in the keep. Each night, she lit her brazier and gazed into the flames. At first, the visions were fleeting: snow falling upon a battlefield, a crown melting in the heat, a red star burning above a frozen sea. But one night, the fire showed her more. She saw a man, young, dark-haired, with eyes like storm clouds. He stood upon the wall, a sword of fire in his hand, though he seemed not to know it yet. Shadows swirled about him, but light bled through the cracks. Melisandre woke trembling. "He is here," she whispered. "The one the fire promised." She sought out Mormont the next day. "The Lord of Light speaks of a man among your brothers," she said. "One who shall rise against the darkness." Mormont frowned. "We have many men, priestess. You'll need to be clearer." "I will know him when I see him." And she did. That evening, as the watch took their meal, her eyes found him, a young man sitting near the hall's end, quiet and watchful. His cloak was black as all the others, but his face was stark and solemn, and his eyes were the eyes from her vision. "His name?" she asked Marin in a whisper. "Jon Snow," he said, "a bastard of Winterfell." Melisandre smiled faintly. "Names are ashes. His fire is what matters." Days passed, and the fire's whispers grew stronger. She saw things in the flames, battles not yet fought, kings rising and falling, a darkness moving beyond the wall that no mortal eye could see. Each vision drew her closer to the truth she had long sought. Marin began to fear her. "These nights you speak to the fire as if it were alive," he said. "It is alive," she answered, "and it is watching." One morning, a horn's cry echoed across the wall. Riders came from the north, black brothers half frozen, wild eyes filled with terror. "Dead things," one gasped. "They walk." Mormont sent out scouts, but Melisandre already knew. The fire had shown her. That night, she stood upon the wall and stared northward. In the far distance, faint lights flickered, blue and cold. "Winter has come again," she whispered, "and with it, the darkness." When she turned, she found Marin behind her, his breath fogging in the air. "If your god truly has power," he said, "then stop it." She looked at him sadly. "I cannot stop what must come, but I can guide those who will stand against it." "Jon Snow?" She nodded. "He will be the light in the darkness." Marin looked away. "And what of me?" Melisandre touched his face, her fingers warm as fire. "You will burn brightly, if only for a moment." The wind howled between the towers, scattering snow into the night. Far below, unseen, something moved beyond the wall, something vast and cold and patient. But on the battlements, the Red Woman stood unmoving, her hair whipped by the storm, her eyes fixed upon the horizon. The fire inside her burned steady and strong. She had walked through shadow, crossed half the world, and found her purpose at last. For the first time in her long, strange life, Melisandre felt the hand of destiny closing around her, and she did not fear it. The night was dark indeed, but she was its flame. Snow fell thick as wool upon the wall, blurring the world into white and gray. The cold crept through stone and bone alike, yet Melisandre felt only warmth. Her fire burned within, steady as a heartbeat. Each night she lit her brazier in her narrow chamber. Each night she prayed before it, and each night the flames spoke to her in tongues of red and gold. Jon Snow. That was the name whispered most often by the fire. She saw him in her visions again and again, standing at the edge of night, sword blazing, the wind tearing at his cloak. But each vision ended the same way, his light flickering, his face vanishing into shadow. The Lord had shown her a truth, but not yet the whole of it. The watch went about their duties with the grim patience of men long hardened by cold. They looked upon her with suspicion, muttering that the Red Woman's fire had no place among them. She paid them no mind. Their ignorance was a kind of blindness, and blindness was the first servant of darkness. She began to hold vigils in the lower halls, where her braziers glow through strange shapes upon the stone. Some brothers came, drawn by curiosity or fear. She spoke to them softly of the Lord's light and the long night that would soon fall. Most left uneasy, but a few remained, listening, believing. The seed was sown. Marin stayed always near, though he spoke little. He had taken the black cloak of a brother to remain by her side, though his oath was thin as ice. The nights had made him lean, his eyes older. She sensed the conflict in him, faith warring with doubt, duty with longing. One evening, he came to her chamber as she watched the flames dance. "They whisper that you mean to make a god of snow," he said, "that you see him as some savior." "I see him as what he must be," Melisandre answered. "The fire does not lie." "And if the fire is wrong?" She turned her gaze upon him. "Fire is never wrong, only those who fail to understand it." He shook his head. "You play with things beyond mortal grasp. The last time men thought to master the flame, it burned all Valyria." "Valyria fell because its fire was stolen," she said calmly. "This flame is given." Their eyes met, and for a moment, silence lay between them, heavy as snow. Then Marin stepped closer. "What of you, Melisandre? What did the fire give you in return for your faith?" She could have told him the truth, that she had given herself long ago, body and soul, that the warmth he saw in her was not mortal heat, but the echo of something far greater. Instead, she said, "It gave me purpose." He reached for her hand, and though his fingers trembled, she did not pull away. "And will that purpose ever let you rest?" "Not while darkness walks," she whispered. A horn's call shattered the stillness of the night. One blast, then another. The alarm spread through the fortress like wildfire. Men ran to arms, torches flaring in the wind. Melisandre rose, her eyes gleaming. "They have come," she said. "What has come?" Marin demanded. "The dead." They climbed to the wall's topmost walkway. The wind howled around them, fierce and biting. Below, in the endless white beyond the gate, shadows moved, slow, deliberate shapes that carried no warmth of life. "There are too many," one of the Black brothers muttered. Melisandre's voice carried above the storm. "The cold is their strength. Fire will be ours." She turned to Marin. "Bring oil, pitch, every torch you can find." The men obeyed her as if spellbound. Fires sprang up along the wall, flickering beacons against the vast dark. Melisandre knelt by one and whispered a prayer. The flame leapt higher, burning blue at its heart. When the dead reached the gate, she lifted her hands. "Lord of light, cast your gaze upon us. Let your servants stand unbroken." The fires roared. arrows ignited mid-flight, streaking through the night like falling stars. The first of the dead caught flame and fell, writhing soundlessly. The brothers shouted in awe and fear alike. Marin fought beside them, blade flashing until he was drenched in sweat and soot. Between blows, he glanced toward Melisandre, and for an instant, amidst the storm and the screams, he saw her, not as a woman, but as a pillar of flame, hair streaming like molten gold, eyes brighter than the sun. The battle raged until dawn. When the pale light crept over the horizon, the field below the wall lay strewn with smoking corpses that would never rise again. Victory, though it felt hollow. Many brothers had fallen, and among them was Marin. They found him near the gate, his sword clutched tight, his face turned skyward. Melisandre knelt beside him, her expression unreadable. "You see, my knight," she murmured. "You did burn brightly." That night, she built a pyre for him. The brothers watched in uneasy silence as she lit the flame. "Do not weep," she told them. "The Lord of Light accepts all who serve in truth." As the fire consumed him, she gazed into its heart. For a moment, she thought she saw Marin's face smiling back, unburdened and whole. Then the smoke carried him away. She turned to the men of the watch. "This is but the first of many battles. The night gathers, and only the fire will stand against it. You must believe." Some turned from her, but others lingered. Fear had opened their hearts to the warmth she offered. In the days that followed, she spent long hours before the flames, seeking meaning in the visions that danced within. Once, the fire showed her Jon Snow again, standing upon a field of snow red with blood. Beside him blazed a sword that burned without heat, light pure as dawn. But behind him something moved, a shadow vast as the sky, crowned in frost. Its eyes were blue stars, and when it opened its mouth, the world froze. Melisandre's breath caught. The Lord of Light showed her no mercy. His truth was fire, and fire revealed all. "So it will come to this," she whispered. That night she stood upon the wall once more, the wind whipping her cloak. Far below, the darkness stirred like a living thing. She closed her eyes and raised her hands to the heavens. "I am your servant," she said to the unseen flames. "Your will is mine. Let me be your sword, your voice, your fire in this endless night." The wind answered with a whisper like a sigh. The stars seemed to shimmer red for a heartbeat, and then the cold returned, deeper than before. Melisandre opened her eyes. Her face was calm, but her gaze burned brighter than any torch. The fire within her would not wane, and so the Red Woman stood her vigil upon the edge of the world, between light and shadow, between the living and the dead. The night stretched vast before her, and she knew it would be long indeed. But she had walked through darkness before, and always, always, she had brought fire. The long night after the battle left the wall cloaked in silence. Smoke clung to the stones, mingled with the scent of blood and pitch. The brothers of the watch buried their dead in the frozen earth, though the ground was hard as iron, and many graves went shallow. Melisandre did not attend their mourning. She stood apart, staring into the eastern sky, where the dawn burned weak and pale. The light that rose was not warm. It was thin, uncertain, a ghost of the sun. Even the day seemed afraid. She felt the chill deep in her bones, though her skin glowed with its familiar heat. The fire inside her whispered, and she knew the darkness had only begun to move. When Lord Commander Mormont came to her chambers that night, his face was grim. "Your fire bought us one dawn," he said, "but the men are uneasy. They whisper that you bring both victory and death. I cannot hold them if they lose faith. Then give them something greater to believe in, she said softly. Give them purpose. The Lord of Light has shown me your doom, old bear, but it is not this day. Mormont studied her with the wary respect one gives a dangerous weapon. I do not worship your god, woman. You will, she murmured. All men do, when the cold closes around them. He left her then, and she returned to her brazier. The flames licked high, red and gold, and within them she saw again the face of the young man, Jon Snow, his eyes shadowed by doubt, his soul heavy with honor. The Lord had marked him. He would be the sword of fire she had seen, but the metal was yet untempered. She went to him the next day, as he trained in the yard with sword and shield. The clang of steel echoed across the stones. He turned when she approached, frowning. The brothers say you conjured the fire that saved us, he said. They say you see the future. I see truth, she replied, and truth is fire. It burns away all else. He lowered his sword. Then tell me, Red Woman, what truth do you see in me? Melisandre studied him. The cold wind lifted strands of her crimson hair, and in her eyes the light flickered like a forge. I see a man divided. You were born of ice, but within you burns a spark of fire. You will stand between two worlds, and through you, the dawn will rise, or fail. He looked away. I'm no king, no hero. I am a bastard. A name is nothing, she said. Even a bastard can be chosen. He met her gaze again, wary but unflinching. Chosen for what? To serve the light. He said nothing more, but she saw the question take root in him. Doubt, she had learned, was not the enemy of faith. It was its beginning. That night, she dreamed again. She walked through a field of snow under a sky without stars. The air was alive with whispers, voices of the dead, calling her name. Beneath the snow, she saw faint glimmers of red, as though embers slept beneath the ice. When she knelt and touched them, fire burst forth, sweeping across the plain until all the world burned. When she woke, her body was cold for the first time in years. The brazier beside her had gone dark. She rose, heart pounding, and relit it with trembling hands. The flame caught, hesitated, then flared weakly to life. For a moment she thought she saw the shape of a great shadow moving within it, vast and cold. The night presses close, she whispered, but I am not yet finished. At dawn, riders came from the south, messengers from the lords of the north. They spoke of strange storms sweeping across the land, of villages swallowed by snow, of dead men walking once more. The walls' watchfires burned day and night, and still the cold deepened. Melisandre spent her hours in the great hall, speaking to the men of the watch. She told them of the Lord of Light's war against the Great Other, of fire's endless struggle against the cold. Her words frightened them, but fear was good. It kept their hearts beating, their fires burning. Jon Snow came often to listen. She saw how he watched her, torn between doubt and fascination. When she caught his gaze, she felt the faintest pull, something in him answering the flame within her. One night, as the storm howled outside, he came to her cell. You speak of light and darkness as if they were men, he said. But men die. What of the rest of us? What of the world when both fire and shadow are spent? She smiled. There will always be fire, Jon Snow. Even when the sun dies, the flame will remain in those who believe. He hesitated, then said quietly, and if belief fails, then the world freezes. They stood in silence for a time, listening to the wind. Then he turned and left, leaving her alone with the flicker of her brazier. She watched him go, knowing that his path and hers were bound by more than chance. Later that night, the fire showed her a vision so clear it stole her breath. She saw the wall shattered, the world drowned in shadow, and above it all a single red flame burning bright. And she saw herself beside it, not as she was now, but ageless, her hair pale as snow, her skin like polished stone, her eyes twin embers. She had glimpsed the truth of her own power, the depth of her bargain. The fire had taken her years ago, and it would not release her until the war was done. When the vision faded, she bowed her head. "So be it," she whispered. "Let the world burn, if it must, so long as the light survives." In the days that followed, she prepared. The Watch rebuilt their defenses, stacking barrels of pitch and stores of oil, and at her urging, they began to craft torches of dragon glass-tipped wood. She walked among them like a shadow of flame, her presence both comfort and unease. At last, one night beneath a moonless sky, she felt it. The air turned sharp as knives, and the wind carried the scent of death. The torches flickered, and the men grew silent. She climbed to the wall's summit and looked north. There, beneath the frozen stars, a line of pale figures moved, slow and steady, endless as the tide. Their eyes shone blue as winter's heart. "The great other comes," she whispered. "The dawn will not wait." Behind her, Jon Snow stepped from the shadows, his cloak snapping in the wind. "Then we fight." Melisandre turned to him, the firelight from her brazier painting his face in gold and red. "Yes," she said softly, "but not for victory, for survival, for the dawn." The wind screamed across the wall, carrying the first cry of the dead. Melisandre raised her hands, and the flames rose in answer, blazing high into the night. And so the Red Woman stood between the living and the cold, her fire the only light in a world of gathering darkness, ready to burn until nothing remained but ash and the promise of dawn. The wind howled like a living thing against the wall, hurling snow and shards of ice that glittered faintly in the dim light. The night was vast, swallowing all sound beyond the thunder of the storm. Yet within that tempest burned fire, crimson, alive, and defiant. Melisandre stood at the wall's edge, her red robe snapping in the wind, her hair streaming like banners of flame. Below, the dead advanced, a tide of pale figures creeping ever closer. The torches along the wall flared and sputtered, their light fragile against the sea of darkness. The men of the Night's Watch moved like shadows, faces grim, hands shaking around their blades. Fear ran through them like cold water, but fear, Melisandre knew, was good. It kept them human. She raised her arms, her voice rising above the wind. "Lord of Light, we are your servants. In the darkness, we are your fire. Protect us now, that your flame may not fade." Her words rolled across the wall, and as she spoke, the braziers blazed higher. The flames leapt from one to another, spilling down the wall's face like molten gold. The dead shrieked, a sound without breath or life, and stumbled back, their skin blistering in the glow. Jon Snow stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the white field below. "They will keep coming," he said. "Fire slows them, not stops them." "Then we burn until there is nothing left to burn," she answered. The first wave struck before dawn. The dead climbed upon each other's backs, clawing their way up the frozen face of the wall. Arrows ignited mid-flight, spearing through the snow with streaks of red fire. Men shouted, the clang of steel mixing with screams and the crack of flame. Melisandre moved among them like a spirit of war. Where she passed, The fire burned brighter. Her voice rang out in the storm, soft yet unyielding, as she whispered the words of old Ashai. Each syllable drew heat from the air. Each breath turned to flame. The sky itself seemed to burn. By the time the sun rose weakly above the horizon, the first assault had been broken. Hundreds of dead things smoldered below the wall, their ashes lost in the snow. Yet victory tasted bitter. Too many brothers had fallen, their bodies carried to the pyres even as smoke from the battle still hung in the air. Jon came to her as they tended the wounded. His face was pale beneath his black hood, his eyes hollow. "How long can we hold them?" he asked. "As long as the fire burns," she said. He stared at her. "And when the fire dies?" Melisandre met his gaze. "Then we light it again." For 3 nights, the dead did not return. The men slept uneasily, and Melisandre sat by her brazier, watching the flames twist and dance. The fire whispered to her, but its voice had changed. It no longer spoke in the calm certainty she had once known. Now it hissed, restless, showing her flashes of things half seen. A great castle burning, banners of gold and crimson torn by the wind, a shadow crowned in frost standing above a field of corpses. And always, at the edge of it, Jon Snow, his sword blazing, his eyes filled with something between hope and sorrow. She awoke from her trance with a start, sweat freezing on her brow. "He is the one," she murmured to the empty room, "but he must be remade." The next morning, she sought him in the yard, where he drilled with the men. "The Lord of Light chose you," she told him. "You were born for this war." Jon frowned. "I was born a bastard." "Even bastards are born for greatness when the fire wills it," she said. "But you are bound by ice and shadow. To rise, you must be reborn." He turned away. "I don't believe in your God." Melisandre's voice softened. "You need not believe in him. He believes in you." For days he avoided her, throwing himself into his duties, but the seed had been planted. Doubt gnawed at him, the same doubt that had burned in her once. When the second attack came, it fell swift and merciless. The dead poured from the forest like a black river, their numbers endless. The Watch fought bravely, but their fire wavered. Men fell screaming into the snow, their torches snuffed beneath trampling feet. Melisandre called upon the fire again, summoning heat from the depths of her soul. Her eyes blazed red, and the snow melted beneath her feet. For a heartbeat, the flames obeyed her perfectly. Then something within her faltered. The fire recoiled, as though some greater shadow smothered it. She gasped, clutching her chest. The cold seized her heart, sharp and sudden. For the first time in years, she felt fear. Not for the world, but for herself. The flame within her flickered weakly. Jon found her kneeling in the snow, her hands glowing faintly. "What happened?" he demanded. "The darkness grows stronger," she whispered. "It has touched even the fire. The great other is near." "Then tell me what to do," he said. Her eyes met his. "You must lead them. You must be the light." "I'm not." "You are," she hissed, her voice fierce as the fire itself. "You were forged for this. Fire and blood made flesh. Do not deny what you are." He hesitated, torn between fear and duty. But when he looked out over the wall and saw the dead advancing again, he knew there was no choice. Together they stood atop the wall once more. The men rallied at Jon's command, their courage renewed by his presence. Melisandre spread her arms and cried out to the heavens. The sky answered with fire. A pillar of flame tore through the storm, striking the field below, scattering the dead like ashes in a gale. The light blinded them all. When it faded, silence reigned. Only smoke and snow remained. Jon looked at her in awe. Was that your god? Melisandre's face was pale as the snow around them. No, she said faintly. That was you. He turned to her, confused, but she was already sinking to her knees, her strength spent. The fire within her had been poured into the world, and there was almost nothing left. As she fell, she felt warmth again, deep and pure, and in it, the faint whisper of the Lord's voice. You have done well, child of flame, but the true dawn is yet to come. She smiled, her eyes dimming, and whispered back, Then let me burn a little longer. The storm eased. The men of the watch carried her to her chamber, where she lay in silence, her pulse faint but steady. Outside, the dawn broke weak and gray, painting the wall in pale light. Jon Snow stood at her door, watching her sleep. Rest, he murmured. The fire still burns. But Melisandre dreamed of shadows and flame, of the final night yet to fall, and the light that would rise to meet it. And though her body trembled with exhaustion, the fire within her heart flared once more. It would not go out. Not yet. The days that followed were a strange kind of calm, the calm that lives between storms. The air above the wall was thin, sharp as glass. Sunlight came and went, pale and distant, never touching the earth with warmth. The men of the night's watch spoke in hushed tones, wary of the red woman who had called fire from the heavens. Melisandre's strength returned slowly. She spent long hours in her chamber, gazing into the brazier's glow. The flames whispered, but their language was veiled, distant, as though some great curtain had fallen between her and the truth. She feared that she had burned too deeply, given too much of herself to the light. Yet even in weakness, she could feel the power pulsing faintly in her veins, patient, eternal. Jon Snow came often, asking counsel. She saw how the battle had marked him, the lines of weariness beneath his eyes, the weight of command pressing upon his young shoulders. He was not yet the man she had seen in her visions, but the shape of him was forming, hammered by fire and cold alike. One evening, he came to her chamber with frost clinging to his cloak. The brothers are restless, he said. Some wish to flee south. Others would go beyond the wall and meet the dead on open ground. I do not know which choice is worse. Neither, Melisandre said. You must wait. The Lord of Lights will unfold like flame. It grows, it feeds, it consumes, but never at once. Jon frowned. The men look to me for strength. I cannot tell them to wait when death is at our door. She rose, crossing to the window slit that overlooked the vast white wilderness. When fire meets shadow too soon, both are destroyed. Patience, Jon Snow. The time will come when you must choose, and that choice will burn the world. He studied her, his gray eyes unreadable. You speak as though my life belongs to your God. All lives belong to him, she said softly. Yours most of all. Jon shook his head. I serve the watch. I serve the living. And the living will serve the fire, she murmured. He left her then, but his words lingered. For all his doubt, he carried the mark of destiny as surely as she carried the fire in her veins. That night, she dreamed of flames again, towering, endless, devouring the world. At their heart stood Jon, sword blazing, the heat so fierce that it melted the wall to water. She awoke trembling, the name Azor Ahai upon her lips, the prince that was promised, the warrior of light. It had to be him. The days shortened and the cold grew crueler. Ravens brought grim tidings from the south, wars among kings, traitors crowned and slain, the realm burning in its own madness, while the true enemy gathered in the dark. Melisandre listened without surprise. Men of power were ever blind to what mattered most. When the next storm came, it came without warning. The sky darkened at midday, and the wind carried the stench of death. Bells clanged along the wall, summoning every able man to the defenses. Melisandre climbed to the top, her cloak whipping around her like a living flame. The horizon writhed. Shadows moved within the blizzard. Hundreds, perhaps thousands. The dead had returned. "Ready the fire!" Jon shouted, his voice carrying over the gale. Men ran to their stations, oil and pitch splashing over the ice. Melisandre raised her hands. "R'hllor, Lord of Light, hear your servant. Bless these flames, that they may banish the cold." Fire roared to life, racing along the wall's edge, a golden serpent winding through the dark. But the dead did not falter. They came on, silent and relentless. Arrows flew, torches fell, and the world became a storm of snow and flame. Jon fought in the thick of it, his sword flashing red in the firelight. Melisandre moved among the wounded, her hands glowing as she whispered prayers that pulled the dying back from the brink, or gave them peace in death. Then the cold deepened, sudden and terrible. The fire dimmed. A sound rose from the forest below, not a scream, not a cry, but the groan of ice splitting beneath its own weight. The others had come. They moved through the storm like phantoms, tall and pale, their armor gleaming faintly blue. Their eyes burned like frozen stars. Every step they took killed the fire around them. Melisandre felt her strength falter. The air itself turned to knives in her lungs. She could not breathe. The flame within her flickered wildly, threatened by that impossible cold. Jon stood before the gate, facing the tallest of the others. Frost rhymed his sword. He looked to her once, his expression calm. "Tell me what to do," he said. "Burn him," she whispered. "Only fire can end them." But he had no fire left. The torches were dying, the wind devouring their light. In desperation, Melisandre thrust her hands toward the sky. "R'hllor," she cried, "your servant calls. Let the world see your light." The heavens answered with thunder. A blaze split the storm, striking the ground before the gate. For a heartbeat, fire blossomed, gold and red and white. The dead shrieked and fell back, the others recoiling from the heat. Jon seized the moment. His blade met the icy sword of the other, and the clash rang like shattering glass. The creature screamed, a sound that froze blood, and broke apart into shards of frost. When the storm finally passed, the wall still stood, though its face was scarred and blackened by flame. The dead lay scattered, unmoving. The men of the watch stared in stunned silence, their breath steaming in the cold air. Melisandre knelt in the snow, too weak to stand. Her vision swam. She had called upon the Lord's fire and lived, but she felt the cost tearing through her. The warmth inside her dimmed to an ember. Jon came to her, his sword still smoking from the battle. "You saved us," he said. She shook her head. "No, you did." He looked at her, eyes shadowed. "If your God spared us tonight, then what does he ask in return?" Melisandre met his gaze. "Everything." The wind rose again, sweeping snow across the corpses of the fallen. The wall groaned beneath the weight of frost, a vast, weary giant. Jon turned to the horizon, where dawn struggled to break through the clouds. "It's not over, is it?" "No," she said softly. "The night is long, Jon Snow, and it has only begun to fall." As the first light of morning touched the ice, Melisandre felt the fire stir once more within her chest, faint but alive. She closed her eyes, breathing in the cold, and whispered to the unseen flames, "Not yet. not until the dawn. Far beyond the wall, in the heart of the storm, something moved, a whisper of frost, a glimmer of blue. The great other was not vanquished. The true war had yet to begin, but for now, the fire still burned. Days bled into nights without difference upon the wall. The sun, when it rose, was pale and distant, a ghostly eye that offered no warmth. Smoke from the pyres coiled endlessly into the gray sky, marking each day's losses. The men of the night's watch moved like wraiths through their duties, too weary for hope, too hardened for despair. Melisandre walked among them, her red robes the only color in a world of ice. She no longer felt the cold. The fire within her burned low but steady, a quiet pulse that kept her from breaking. She saw the fear in the men's eyes when she passed, and she welcomed it. Fear was reverence, and reverence was strength. Jon Snow had changed. He bore himself differently now, his gaze keener, his voice steadier. The battle had carved something into him, the shape of a leader, though he did not yet see it himself. At times, when he looked at her, she caught that flicker of mistrust that men give to prophets, to those who claim to know what lies ahead. One evening, as the wind screamed around the towers, he came to her chambers unbidden. "The brothers question why you remain," he said. "The dead have not returned. Some say your war is done." Melisandre smiled faintly. "They mistake silence for peace. The night has many faces, and it has only begun to show one." He crossed his arms. "Then tell me what comes next." "I cannot see it clearly," she said. "The fire shows only fragments now, shadows moving through snow, a red star falling, a sword in darkness." Jon shook his head. "I've heard your riddles enough. If there's truth in your flames, speak it plain." She studied him, the light from the brazier painting his face in amber and gold. "You will die, Jon Snow," she said at last. "And through death, the dawn will rise." He went still. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, "I've no wish for prophecy, nor for death." "Wishes are for children," Melisandre replied. "The Lord does not grant them. He shapes men by fire and shadow, until they become the weapons he requires." Jon's jaw tightened. "If your God demands my life, he will find me unwilling." "He will not ask," she said simply. "He will take." He turned and left her then, his steps echoing in the hall. Melisandre watched him go, knowing the truth would burn him long before any blade could. That night, the fire whispered again, softly, insistently. "The time draws near, the cold gathers, the flame must be fed." When she looked into the brazier, she saw the wall in ruins, its ice split like broken glass. She saw shadows pouring southward, endless and pale, and at the heart of it, she saw Jon, his eyes closed, his skin pale, his lips blue. Her breath caught. "No," she whispered, "not yet." But the fire never lied. Winter deepened. The ravens stopped coming from the south. The stores of food grew thin. The wind howled ceaselessly, carrying the sound of cracking ice and distant screams. The men spoke of shapes moving beyond the forest, glimpsed between snowflakes, shapes that vanished when the torches came near. One morning, a horn's call split the air. Riders approached from the south, a handful of wildlings, frostbitten and near death. Among them was a woman, fierce and flame-haired, with eyes like storm clouds. She rode straight to Jon. "I bring warning," she said. "They're marching again, thousands. The dead follow a new master now." Jon's face hardened. "How far?" 2 days, maybe less." When the council gathered in the hall, Melisandre was already there, standing beside the brazier. The flames reflected in her eyes as she spoke. This is the moment I have seen. Fire against cold, light against endless night. You must not flee, Jon Snow. You must face it. He looked at her across the room. And if I fall, then rise again, she said, as all fires do. The brothers prepared for battle. They gathered every torch, every drop of oil, every shard of dragon glass. The wind screamed louder as if warning them. The wall itself groaned, its ancient heart uneasy. When the dead came, they came like a blizzard, swallowing all light. The men lit their fires, but the storm devoured the flames. Steel rang, arrows hissed, and the air filled with the sound of breaking bones. Melisandre stood at the center of it all, her hands raised, her voice steady as she called upon the Lord of Light. "Let the darkness burn," she cried. Flames roared from the snow, spiraling skyward. The night turned red. Jon fought beside her, his sword gleaming faintly with the reflection of her fire. Again and again he struck, cutting through the dead. But for every one that fell, 2 more took its place. Then she saw him, the one who led them, a figure of ice and shadow, tall and crowned with frost. His eyes met hers across the chaos, and she felt the heat within her falter. The great other, the enemy she had dreamed of since the beginning. He raised his hand, and the flames bent away from him, dying in the air. The heat bled from her skin. The wall itself seemed to groan in pain. Jon turned, saw the dark figure, and charged. "Stay back!" Melisandre shouted, but her voice was lost in the storm. Their blades met with a sound like thunder. Light and darkness clashed, each blow shattering the air. For a heartbeat, the world hung between them. Then the other drove his sword through Jon's chest. The young man fell. Time seemed to stop. The dead roared in triumph, and Melisandre felt something tear inside her, a wound not of flesh, but of soul. She stumbled forward through the snow, kneeling beside him. His eyes stared blankly upward, gray as the sky. "No," she whispered, "not yet. Not like this." The fire inside her flared, desperate and wild. She pressed her hands against his chest. "Lord of Light," she gasped, "I am your servant. Take me, if you must, but let him burn again." Her vision filled with gold. Heat surged through her, burning, consuming. She screamed, but she did not stop. When the light faded, the battlefield lay silent. The dead had fled, the shadows retreating beyond the forest. Melisandre lay beside Jon's body, smoke curling from her fingertips. Then, slowly, he drew breath. The men who found them spoke of a miracle. They said the Red Woman had called him back from death, that her fire had stolen him from the cold itself. When Jon woke, he said nothing for a long time. His eyes were darker now, his face pale as snow. "You brought me back," he said at last. Melisandre's voice was little more than a whisper. "The Lord did." He looked at her with something between gratitude and fear. "What am I now?" She met his gaze. A flame reborn. The dawn's beginning. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving a sky of crimson and gold. The wall stood still, though cracks of blue ice ran deep within it. The night had retreated, but not forever. Melisandre knew that what she had done carried a price. The fire never gave without taking. But as she watched Jon Snow rise once more, the wind tugging at his black cloak, she felt the faintest warmth spread through the cold morning air. And for the first time since the world had darkened, she allowed herself to believe, truly believe, that the dawn might come after all. When dawn rose after the battle, the light felt strange, thin uncertain, as though the sun itself were afraid to shine too brightly. The snow around the wall had melted into rivers of ash and black water, and the stench of burnt flesh hung heavy in the air. Men spoke in whispers, as though afraid that their voices might awaken the dead again. Jon Snow lived, though none could explain how. The brothers said the Red Woman had breathed fire into his corpse, that her god had stolen him from the grave. He walked among them pale and silent, his eyes hollow, his hands trembling when he touched his sword. They called him the Ghost in Black, though never within his hearing. Melisandre watched him from afar at first, too weak to rise from her cot. The act of calling him back had taken much from her. Her body ached, her blood felt cold, and the flame that once burned fierce in her chest now guttered like a dying candle. Yet she did not regret it. The Lord of Light had answered her plea, and the prince that was promised had risen once more. When she could finally stand, she found him alone upon the wall, staring north. The wind howled around them, carrying the faint creak of frozen timber. "You should rest," she said softly. Jon turned. His face was pale as bone. "I don't sleep. When I close my eyes, I see it. The cold, the darkness, the faces of those I killed, and the one who killed me." Melisandre's gaze held his. "You were not meant for rest. The fire has claimed you now. It will not let you go." He looked away. "Then your god is cruel." "All gods are cruel," she said, "but only mine gives men a purpose in their suffering." For a long time they stood in silence, the wind moaning through the ice. At last, Jon spoke again. "If I was brought back for a purpose, tell me what it is. Why me?" She stepped closer, her eyes reflecting the pale morning light. "Because the darkness fears you. Because the fire needs you. You are the sword in the night, the light that must not go out." Jon shook his head. "I'm no hero. I'm just a man who died and shouldn't have." Melisandre smiled faintly. "And yet, you live. That is enough." The weeks that followed were uneasy ones. The brothers of the Watch treated Jon with wary reverence, as though he were something no longer quite human. Some bowed their heads when he passed, others made signs to ward off evil. Melisandre felt their fear and fed it, reminding them through quiet words and whispered prayers that the Lord of Light had saved them all through Jon's rebirth. But Jon avoided her. He spent his days rebuilding the wall's defenses and his nights wandering alone. She could feel the fire inside him, restless and untrained, as if the very act of life burned too hot for his mortal flesh. One evening, she found him in the yard, striking at a post with Ghost beside him. The direwolf's white fur was stained with soot. Jon's blows fell harder than before, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You fight shadows," she said. "They're all that's left," he replied without looking up. "Then learn to fight them properly." He stopped, lowering his sword. "And how would you have me do that, priestess? By staring into your flames until I see what you want me to see?" Her voice did not rise. "By seeing what is already within you." When he turned to her, anger flickered behind his eyes, but so did fear. "And what if I don't like what I find there?" "Then you will learn to master it. Fire consumes, Jon Snow, but it also purifies. You must let it burn away what you were, so that you may become what you must be." He said nothing, only turned back to his training. Yet that night, when she lit her brazier, she felt his presence outside her door. He did not enter, but she knew he listened as she whispered her prayers to the Lord of Light. Winter deepened. The storms grew harsher, the winds louder. From the north came no sign of the dead, But Melisandre knew better than to trust quiet skies. The darkness waited, gathering strength. Her visions returned slowly, hazy at first. She saw towers crumbling in flame, a red star falling into snow, and the shadow of a crown melting in fire. She saw Jon walking through it all, the world burning behind him, his face calm and resolute. But another figure appeared beside him, a woman cloaked in white, her eyes cold as ice, her hand outstretched toward him. When Melisandre tried to see her face, the vision shattered. She woke gasping, her skin slick with sweat. The brazier beside her had gone cold again. At dawn, she went to Jon. "You must leave the wall," she told him. "The fire shows me that your path lies beyond. Southward." He frowned. "Leave? The wall is my duty." "Your duty is to the living, not to stone and ice. The wall will not stop what is coming. It was never meant to." He studied her a long moment. "And if I refuse, then all will burn," she said simply. Jon turned toward the horizon, where the sky met the snow. "If I go, what then? I have no army, no banner." "You will have fire," she said, "and fire is all you need." When he finally agreed, it was with the air of a man surrendering not to her, but to fate itself. The brothers watched in silence as he rode out through the gate, Ghost padding at his side, the red woman walking beside his horse. The sky above was gray and heavy, the wind biting. They traveled for many days through frozen forests and abandoned villages. The silence of the land pressed upon them. At night, when they camped, Melisandre lit small fires that burned without wood, flames that shimmered like liquid gold. Jon would watch them, his eyes reflecting the light, and she could see the questions within him that he would not ask. One night, as the fire crackled low, he spoke at last. "You said I would die, and I did. You said I would rise again, and I have. Tell me, how many times can fire bring a man back before he's no longer a man?" Melisandre met his gaze. "As many times as the Lord wills." He shook his head. "That's no answer." "It is the only one that matters." He stared into the flames. "If your God has a plan for me, I'll see it through. But if he means for me to burn the world to save it, then I'll find another way." She regarded him in silence. In that moment, beneath the cold stars, she saw something she had never seen before, a strength not born of faith, but of defiance. The fire had chosen him, yes, but he would make its will his own. When she looked into the flames that night, she saw them together, fire and shadow, light and ice. The storm was coming still, vast and terrible, but for the first time she felt no fear. The Lord of Light had given her a weapon. Whether that weapon would save the world or end it, only the fire could say. And so they rode south, toward the War of Kings and the gathering dark, the Red Woman and the Man reborn, each aflame against the dying of the light. The snows thinned as they rode south, giving way to gray hills and forests where the wind no longer screamed but whispered. The air, though cold, no longer cut to the bone. Each mile took them further from the wall's shadow and the ghosts it kept. Yet neither Melisandre nor Jon Snow spoke much of what they had left behind. The world of men lay ahead again, restless, burning, divided by crowns and quarrels. Word reached them in passing villages of wars still raging in the south, of kings slain and lords betrayed. Armies marched while the true enemy gathered unseen beyond the frozen edge of the world. They came first to a ruined holdfast, its gate blackened by fire. Corpses lay in the yard, picked clean by wolves. Jon dismounted and knelt beside the dead. "This was no raid," he murmured. "Men did this to their own." Melisandre gazed at the sky, where smoke drifted in thin gray lines. The darkness need not touch a man's heart to make him cruel. It whispers, and he listens. Jon rose, jaw tight. If your God truly brings light, he's late to his own battle. The Lord of Light is never late, she said softly. Only patient. That night, they made camp by the ruins. The fire she kindled burned high, painting the stones gold. Jon sat opposite her, his hands clasped, his face half in shadow. "Do you ever tire of prophecy?" he asked suddenly. Melisandre smiled faintly. "Prophecy is fire, Jon Snow. It warms and it burns. Those who touch it must learn which they are." He stared into the flames. "And what am I?" Her gaze did not waver. "You are the spark that will become the storm, the one who stands where night meets dawn." Jon's eyes flickered to hers. "A weapon, then." "All who serve the light are weapons," she said. "But you are one forged by death itself." He looked away. "You speak of me as though I were not a man." "You are more than a man," she said, "but you must choose what that means." The fire cracked, casting long shadows upon the stone. Neither spoke again until the night was nearly gone. When she finally looked up, she found him asleep beside the dying embers, his sword resting against his shoulder. Ghost lay at his feet, watchful and silent. Melisandre turned her eyes to the east. The first light of dawn touched the horizon, a thin line of gold bleeding through gray clouds. "The dawn," she whispered, "but not yet the end." In the days that followed, they traveled through the Northlands, where winter had begun to ease its grip. Villages reawakened, though the people eyed them warily. Rumors spread before them. The Red Witch and the man returned from death. Some sought blessings from them. Others spat upon the ground when they passed. In one small hamlet, a boy came running from the crowd, clutching a tattered bundle. He thrust it into Jon's hands. Within lay a newborn, wrapped in linen. "The fever took his mother," the boy said. "They say your fire heals." Jon froze, looking helplessly to Melisandre. Her gaze softened. She knelt beside the child and placed a hand upon its brow. The skin burned with fever, yet the flame within her answered faintly. "R'hllor, Lord of Light," she murmured, "spare this spark from shadow." The fire in her palm glowed soft as candlelight. The infant stirred, then began to cry, weakly but alive. The boy gasped. "You saved him." Melisandre's hand trembled as she drew it back. "No," she whispered. "The Lord did." But the warmth she had given the child had cost her more than she let show. That night, when they left the village, Jon rode in silence until he finally said, "You could have refused." "I could have," she agreed. "You're dying," he said. She smiled faintly. "We all are, Jon Snow. Some of us simply burn faster." He looked at her then, truly looked, and saw that the firelight upon her face was not reflected. It came from within her. "If your flame dies," he began. "It will not die," she said. "It will go where it is needed." They rode on. South of the neck, the air grew milder still, though the scent of smoke hung heavy. Armies had passed that way, their banners torn by wind and rain. Fields lay blackened, and villages smoldered. When they reached the ruins of an inn along the King's Road, Melisandre felt the pull of her visions again. She sat by the hearth and stared into the coals until the world faded away. In the fire, she saw the Iron Throne, melting. Its swords flowed like rivers of blood. A woman sat upon its molten crown, her eyes the color of ash. Behind her stood Jon Snow, cloaked in shadow, a sword of light in his hand. The woman turned to him, and when Melisandre saw her face, she gasped. It was the same face she had seen once before, the one in her earlier visions. She woke to find Jon watching her. "What did you see?" he asked. "The same flame," she whispered, "but split in two. I don't understand." "You will," she said, "when the war of men ends and the war of night begins." He frowned. "You speak of wars like seasons. How many must there be?" "As many as it takes," she said, "until the dawn truly comes." They left the inn before sunrise. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, quiet, waiting. Birds sang faintly in the distance, but even that sound felt fragile. On the road, they passed travelers fleeing north, bearing stories of dragons in the sky, of cities burning, of armies marching toward one another. Men spoke of queens and kings, of vengeance and destiny, but none spoke of the cold creeping from beyond the wall. Jon listened to their tales with a hard expression. When they were alone again, he said, "If we're to stop what's coming, we'll need more than fire and prophecy. We'll need men willing to fight for something greater than thrones." "They will come," Melisandre said. "The fire gathers its own." "And if they do not? Then the world will freeze and the stars will die. But even then, the fire will remember." That night, they camped upon a hill overlooking the riverlands. The sky burned crimson with sunset, and Melisandre felt the old warmth return for a moment, fierce and unyielding. She looked to Jon, his face lit by the fire's glow, and thought she saw in him what she had spent her life seeking, not the promised prince of prophecy, but something rarer still, a man who bore the weight of destiny, yet did not crave it. "You were right," she said softly. "You are no hero. But perhaps that is what the world needs." Jon met her gaze. "Heroes die. I've done that once already." She smiled faintly. "Then die again if you must. Each death brings the dawn closer." They sat together as the stars emerged, cold and distant above them. In the silence that followed, the fire cracked softly, its light steady against the dark, and far to the north, beyond the shattered wall, the wind began to rise again. The war of men might yet end, but the war for the dawn was only beginning.